I tell people all the time, I'm not an enlightened being. Well, I guess if we're Buddhists, we're all enlightened beings. We just forgot it. But you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not someone's guru. I'm not that smart. I'm not that good. All I have is the method. And I have my constant study of the method. And that's what I try to rely on. And that's why I've had a busy practice for the last 2+ decades. But it comes from, again, that mastery of the basic material.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. One of the things I've found to be a useful practice that will expand your perceptive capacity is to, instead of focusing on pathology, try looking at how the energetics and rubrics of East Asian medicine express and play out in everyday life in ways that are either normal or as a part of a cultivated capacity of someone who is at the top of their game. Can you turn your attention from using the 5-phase, 6-chi, or really any other diagnostic method that you employ and have found to be useful, and use it to watch the unfolding of life in a non-pathological way? As practitioners, we are trained to find pathology and effectively intervene. We grow habituated to looking for problems. And even though Chinese medicine contains the idea of zheng-qi, we also consider things within the natural cycles of unfolding. Still, our training, it predisposes us to look for trouble. Over time, that can skew your perspective and make you a bit of a fundamentalist, authoritarian, or even embarrassingly self-righteous when you complain on your social media about a waiter bringing you a glass of ice water. I'll go so far as to say that many of us in our profession, in the interest of, air quotes here, health and balance, have painted ourselves into a puritanical perspective, perhaps downright leery of anything that reeks of excess. Last summer, Sharon Sherman did a presentation for this Chautauqua. Her session was focused on using videos to look at the wild imbalance that is expressed that makes somebody great at what they do. She used video clips that gave a glimpse into how the energies of the 5 phases and the 6-chi arise, play out, and express appropriately in everyday life, and then fade into the background. There was not a focus on pathology, but instead, these short videos highlighted the everyday expression of the energies that so often in a clinical context would carry the label of pathology. Honestly, I do this all the time myself. Pathologize normal, everyday human experience and interaction. Is it dysfunction that drives a top-performing athlete to excel at their sport? For sure, they're not living a life of balance and harmony. They're pushing on their physiology and spirit in ways that would break most of us. Often enough, they break themselves too. I'm curious, would you want to craft a treatment that would calm their shen? Or would you want to help wind up their lopsided wobble that powers them in pursuit of a gold medal? The writer that knows storms and tides of emotional distress, would harmonizing them out of their capacity to feel and spin gripping stories be helpful to them? Or would it dry the well of their inspiration and perspective? How comfortable are you with watching a patient, a family member, or friend suffer their brilliance, but there would be even more suffering without it? There is an imbalance to extraordinary performance. You can see over time how that price gets paid. So, that gift that brings us our challenge. What do you think? Level it in the name of harmony, or throw some rocket fuel on it? I suspect that when patients ask you how acupuncture works, the words balance and harmony are often part of the explanation. And yet, so often, It's the edges and imbalances where you'll find the excitement, challenge, and insights that allow for a fuller life. It's how we gain capacity. It's the domain where meaningful change is created. That kind of striving, it makes life more interesting. And for sure, we can pay the price when limits are pushed. But the payback for effort expended in service of what we seek to better understand and be able to practice, well, I'm going to have the guest of this conversation tell you more about that. Henry McCann, before he took up the study of acupuncture, he was classically trained as a musician, so he knows something about focus and attentive practice. Classically trained musicians are a curious breed. So are acupuncturists. We will be exploring the Venn diagram that intersects them, along with the pathways of motivation, mastery, and how you stick with a method long enough that it begins to teach you. Practice, it's not a noun. It's a verb. Let's get into it. Geological Conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. You have clinic challenges? Our sponsors have solutions. Blue Poppy offers same-day fulfillment and free shipping on orders over $50. Need to send a custom herbal formula to a patient? Sun10 makes it easy for you with their direct delivery service. Looking to reimagine your clinical practice? Consider the study of nature's design with Ed Neal at the Apricot Grove. Later in the show, Jane has helpful solutions to raising your clinic fees, and Golden Flower Chinese Herbs shares a journey of healing that I think you'll recognize. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. When it comes to running a smooth, efficient clinic, having a reliable supplier makes all the difference. That's where Blue Poppy comes in. From premium acupuncture needles and trusted herbal formulas to innovative solutions like their liquid moxa, a smokeless, low-fume alternative to traditional moxa, Blue Poppy has everything you need all in one place. And the best part, Blue Poppy offers free shipping on all orders over $50 with no restriction in the continental United States. For nearly 40 years, Blue Poppy has supported licensed acupuncturists with high-quality products and a commitment to exceptional service. Visit bluepoppy.com today and discover why so many practitioners trust Blue Poppy. Don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more. Discover the harmony of tradition and innovation with Sun10. Since 1946, they've been dedicated to bringing the wisdom of traditional Chinese medicine to modern wellness practices. Their extensive range of herbal extracts and supplements is crafted with precision and care, adhering to the highest quality standards. Through Sun10's dispensary, healthcare professionals can easily create personalized herbal formulas delivered directly to their patients' doors. Experience the synergy of ancient knowledge and contemporary convenience. Visit sun10.com to learn more. Are you ready to create your practice through an in-depth study of the original writings of Chinese medicine? Beginning August 24th, join the Apricot Grove and Dr. Edward Neal on a transformative journey into the roots of Chinese medicine. If you are new to the classics, their Wisdom of the Cosmos class offers a wonderful introduction to the original writings of Chinese medicine and Neijing, nature-based medicine. For those seeking a deeper immersion, their highly esteemed 2-year postgraduate training in Neijing, nature-based medicine, and classical text archaeology provides a comprehensive pathway to advanced clinical practice grounded in the Neijing text. Come and join a vibrant global community reimagining clinical practice through the traditional writings of the Huangdi Neijing and study of nature's design. Tuition assistance is available. Visit neijingstudies.com to learn more and enroll today. Henry McCann, welcome, I guess I should say, back to Geological. It's been a while.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's good to be back after it has been a while, yes.
It's been a long time. It was way back in the beginning, episode 14. we're talking about resonance and Dongshi Zhenzhou, and that was the very early days of Qiological. You were one of the brave people to come on and try this thing out.
It was fun. It was fun, definitely. And it's I've been looking forward to come back for a second episode or whatever else we can continue doing. So it's great.
Love it. Love it. One of the things I wanted to chat with you about today, we talk a lot about our practice and our medicine and how you do it, how you make it work. All these things are really important. The technique side of our profession, the tools, if you will, super important. But we also talk a lot about cultivation, and often I think, this is just me speaking, crabby old guy, in a fetishized sort of way, like you got to do Tai Chi and you got to pay attention to your diet and you got to do all these things in your life to, cultivate yourself. But I've got a lot of questions about cultivation in the modern world.
Sure.
And one of the things that I know a little bit about from your background is that you were not always an acupuncturist.
That is correct. Yes.
You used to be a musician.
I was, and I was a public school music teacher for some time as well. I mean, I was young. It was as early on. I came to Chinese medicine also fairly young, but yes, it was not my first profession, certainly.
Yeah. So a musical education, that seems really different than acupuncture. But I've got a feeling that there might be something in that you brought forward into your acupuncture work.
Yes, and it's a good question. It's a good question, and one that I've chewed on myself for quite some time, and I've talked to people informally about. One of the best ways I can describe it, or a good anecdote that I can give you is, years ago, and it was when I was still a music teacher, I left the formal teaching of music, the classroom, back in, I think it was 2001. It was when I left teaching and decided to throw myself fully into acupuncture practice. I entered the field practicing. I got my license to practice acupuncture Chinese medicine in 1999. And so for the first couple of years there, I was trying to juggle both public school teaching. I would teach, get out of class, get out of the high school, drive to downtown Boston where my practice was, and see patients in the afternoon and early evenings. And so I had to try juggling both. In 2001, I decided to make the transition fully to... You
made the transition? But wait a minute. Before that, you were going to acupuncture school.
Yes.
And working.
And working, right. So I put myself through acupuncture school by teaching public school.
Got it.
Right. And so I lived in Japan in 1995, 1996 on a Fulbright. I was there doing graduate studies in modern Japanese history at the University of the Ryukyu down in Okinawa. And that's when I decided that I would pursue practicing Chinese medicine. So I applied to the New England School of Acupuncture. I was admitted to their class. And so 1996, I guess, is when I returned back to the United States, enrolled in the New England School of Acupuncture, and I had to figure out how to support myself. And so I had a degree in music, which we can talk about also prior to that. So I found myself a teaching position in Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is just north of Boston, and started teaching high school there while I started putting myself through acupuncture school. So it certainly beat a lot of other part-time work I could do because I was a professional, had healthcare, all that sort of stuff. And it was something that I genuinely loved, So growing up, my two loves were martial arts and music. Right. And so music was what I eventually found my first career in, basically.
Yeah. So tell me about the music.
So, I started, there wasn't really anyone musical in my family.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, there wasn't. My great-grandfather, who I never met, he passed away back in the 1920s. He died very young, unfortunately. He and his buddies were making homemade alcohol during Prohibition, and that led to a series of unfortunate events. And so he was not in the picture, but he played the concertina, which looks like a small accordion, and
squeeze box.
Exactly, and he played the saxophone. I don't know where his saxophone went. His concertina, a cousin of mine, one of my mother's first cousins, still has his concertina. But that was the only musician that we knew in the family. But my grandmother always liked music, and so she arranged to get me music lessons when I was, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that range. I started playing organ, interestingly.
And you were interested at that point, or it was like your grandma says, "Hey, this might be good for you. Check it out." Or
yeah, I think that it was the latter. I don't think I asked for those lessons initially, but they were there. So I started doing that, and then when I was old enough in the public school to do music in public school, I started doing that in addition to the training I had outside of there. And it was something that I just really fell into. I enjoyed quite a bit. In high school, my grandmother also paid for private lessons, and even though I started originally in organ, which I don't really play much anymore, I transitioned to wind instruments. And so saxophone was my primary. I also played bassoon was my main secondary, clarinet, a little bit of flute. I'm not a very good flute player, but that's what I did. And when I was looking at college, I decided that I wanted to do a degree in music, as well as do some sort of academic subject, because my father said you can do a degree in music as long as you also do something useful.
It's not bad advice.
Yeah. So it was not bad advice at all. So I said, okay, useful. I'll do East Asian studies, and that was my use. That was my useful degree.
That was your useful degree. Is that like flipping your middle finger at your dad in a way?
No. It was just what I fell into, and it was fine. But so
he was okay with that.
He was fine. He was totally fine. His big thing was as long as I could support myself, he didn't care what I did, and that was pretty good. And so I was lucky enough to find myself at Oberlin. I only applied to 3 schools because back then there was no one in my family left alive who had gone to college. So I was, my father's college advice was go ahead and apply to college. We really had no idea what the process was like. We had guidance counselors in school, but they were, as most guidance counselors are, not super useful. So I applied basically to 3 schools, the State University here in New Jersey, Indiana University out in Bloomington because of their...
Oh, that's a good music school.
Well, exactly why, which is why I applied there. And then Oberlin because of the conservatory. And the nice thing about Oberlin was they do a 5-year degree program where you can enroll both in the college and conservatory and then graduate with both a Bachelor of Arts in whatever field and a Bachelor of Music degree.
Perfect.
So I came out with both the Bachelor of Arts and then the professional Bachelor of Music degree, which is great. And so that sort of set me up in my initial music professional training, which then allowed me to get my teaching gig afterwards, because my degree in the conservatory was specifically in music education. So I'm actually still a certified teacher in Massachusetts. And because the way they do certificates up there is they don't do it by year of expiration. They give you a certain number of years to teach on. And if you don't teach all those years, then it's still there. It's
oh wow!
If I wanted to go back, yeah. If
you haven't used it up,
if the acupuncture thing doesn't pan out, maybe I can go back to the music thing.
It's good to have a backup.
Yeah, for sure. But your
dad was right.
The question you asked initially was a good one, and when I was teaching at some point, I don't remember what the context was, but someone asked, what do I do? And I said, I'm a music teacher. And they said something like, oh, that must be a really sort of creative thing. And, I sat and I thought for a second. And, it's like I wasn't an elementary school music teacher where it's general music and kids come in and they get an experience. I was an instrumental music teacher mostly at the high school level. I did some middle school teaching, but mostly at the high school level. And I thought to myself, well, it's possible that it's creative, but to some extent, music is a discipline where if my student wanted to be a professional musician, right, if that was their end goal, then they do exactly what I tell them to do for the first decade.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because they're not, unless they're a prodigy, right, which the majority of people, by definition, are not.
Are not. Nope.
Otherwise, we wouldn't call them prodigies, right? I mean, I wasn't. My musical education was it's really one of the last few classical educations out there, right? So I studied instrumental music for years before I did anything akin to music theory, for example, right?
So now, when you say a classical education,
right,
what does that mean?
So a classical education is one that is very structured. There's a very sort of sequential learning process from beginning to mastery.
Yes.
A lot of the early part of it involves memorization.
Hey, this sounds like something I've known about.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right? So memorization, repetition, right? So as a musician, I had to learn fingering. It's not like I can make up fingering on a wind instrument. There's one way to do they're alternate fingerings, but basically they're all mapped out for the most part. Right? Scales, I have to memorize scales. I have to practice them over and over again. When I was in conservatory, I would spend an hour or two, a couple times a week, in the practice rooms just doing scales. I'd shut the lights off, close my eyes, and just do scales up and down, and arpeggios up and down, up and down. Because before I can play art, like play something that rises to the level of true art, something truly artistic.
Yes.
You have to have all of those fundamentals completely under your fingers.
You have to be fluent.
Exactly. And the fluency only comes from long periods of time of repetition over and over and over again. So,
it's boring. It's boring, isn't it?
It can be. It depends on how much you like the material, right? That's what it really comes down to.
How do you get through the boring stuff?
Well, I think it's really how much you want it, and how much you really how much you want the material, and how engaging you find even the boring stuff, right? I once read some anecdote about Charlie Parker, so for your listeners, if they don't know who Charlie Parker is, first, shame on them. But, they can go out and get some recordings. Charlie Parker was one of the great names in jazz music, and he was a saxophone player. And there was some story about, like, he would go home after school, before school, whatever, and he would play his saxophone. He was a saxophone player. He would play his saxophone like 4 to 5 hours a day, and he would drive the neighbors crazy because he would just be playing, right? But he gained mastery by that intense type of practice, right? And so...
Yes.
One of the things that I think was very useful about studying music and studying Chinese medicine is I was predisposed to the idea that there had to be some sort of basic memorization of core material, sometimes that even is that which precedes understanding. Mm-hmm. Right?
I've heard the stories of supposedly in the old days where somebody wanted to learn medicine, and it's like, well, okay, sweep my clinic. And after you swept the clinic for a while, just to show that you can do boring stuff, I guess.
Right.
They'd be like, okay, here's what these things are. Like, learn what these things are. And you learn what the things are.
Right.
And then later they tell you about how to use it. But that comes way down the road.
Right. So, I look at things like learning where acupuncture points are, learning the specific indications of acupuncture points, or learning herb by herb by herb by herb by herb, memorizing basic scales or arpeggios. Mm-hmm. Right? And before you can make a composition of those, you have to have all of those basic prerequisites really, really well under your fingers, right? One of the interesting things, because I'm quickly learning that I'm a dinosaur of sorts, I guess. We both are, because we're of similar, this year is 26 years in practice for me. So we're...
Same here.
Yeah, right. So it's a similar vintage. So now all your listeners have to hear in my days stories. That's right.
Back when we was kids.
When I was at NISA, this predates like Deadman's book, right?
Right. When Deadman's book came out, it was like a revelation.
It was, and it must have been my first year in practice. I never saw it when I was still a student, right? So we worked out of CAM. Was basically it. Mm-hmm. CAM, and then our teachers at the New England school gave us notes that they had compiled themselves, right? So they weren't even published books. And one of the things that you will notice in CAM, and if you haven't noticed this lately, whoever's listening to this should pull CAM off their shelf if they still have it and just take a look. You'll notice that none of the acupuncture points have point functions or point actions. They only have point indications. So when we were learning acupuncture, when I was a student, when we were learning what acupuncture points did, we essentially memorized lists of indications. With some maybe big exceptions, like you could generalize stomach 36 has a strong supplementing effect on qi and blood, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, when we did a quiz on the kidney channel, we had to look at what point on the kidney channel had the indications of low back pain, frequent urination, whatever. And based on the indications, we had to identify what point we were looking at. So there wasn't necessarily a discussion of unless you had a point that was part of a point category, such as a UN source point, ink spring point, Ishi clef, whatever. You looked at memorizing information about the points before there was some sort of deep understanding, right? Same thing in the clinic. When you get into the clinic, you are oftentimes, if you're following someone else in the clinic, so in my clinic, I have interns. Every day I'm here, I have an intern who comes in and just follows. And, to be honest, I love theory more than the next guy, but when they're here in the clinic, I want them to just observe. Mm-hmm. If they have a question, they can bring it up. But the most important thing for them to do is observe the practice, right? And just get the overall viewpoint in their sort of psyche somewhere. So this all happens before sort of the deep understanding. And this is where I think sometimes we tend to fall down as in education. I think it's important for us to assume our students are going to do the work of really trying to memorize material for a long time before we can assume they have a deep understanding of how to use that material clinically. Listen, there's a lot of stuff I still don't know how to use certain things clinically, right? I'm still chewing on it. All of us the nice thing about Chinese medicine is that we can spend a lifetime.
For sure.
Yeah, right? Chewing on. Rest
of our life.
And if you don't want to sign up for that, then I don't know, don't do Chinese medicine, do something else. But the understanding unfolds itself over time. And so for me, the discipline of learning music was a really good sort of setup for that type of sequential learning. I learned just the location of the points, just the indication of the points, memorize them. Look at case studies of famous doctors and try to understand what they were doing in using these points. Right. One of the things I like about Dong's acupuncture in particular is because, by all accounts, Master Dong in Taiwan did not like to talk to his patients, to his students, to anyone. So people would ask questions and he'd say, well, just look at what I do and figure it out for yourself. Right. So the only thing we have from him, the original legacy, is the list of points, the locations, and the indications. And it's up to us over time to reconstruct the understanding of when are we actually doing these things. Does that make sense?
I hear you use the words reconstruct understanding, and it just sounds so completely right. It sounds right to me because I've noticed, again, we have a lot of fetishes in our trade. One of them is our history.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's been around a long time, so it must be great.
Which is the ultimate Orientalist excuse for...
Well, Orientalist or not, it's just not helpful.
I totally.
Right? It's not helpful. And, it's leaning on a capacity that has not been earned.
Right.
Unless it comes alive in us.
Right.
At this time.
Exactly.
In our work, history doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So it has to come alive. And I think this is what you're discussing here. You're sharing with us that partly it's the discipline.
Right.
That allows it to come alive. It gives you the basis, the foundation. Otherwise, there's nothing to kindle.
Right. And this is, I do have to say, this is one of the risks and dangers of the lineage system that we see within things like Chinese medicine. While the lineage can be powerful, if we rely only on the lineage and not our own personal application of that lineage, it's a problem, right?
100%.
I can tell you that if I were to name my music teachers over the years, many of them were fantastic musicians. It doesn't really matter who they were if I can't play the piece when it comes time to stand in front of an audience.
Right.
Right?
100%.
Because what they taught was important, but my own embodiment of that is the most important when it comes to being in front of an audience. So the same thing is like, listen, the Dong lineage is awesome, but if we had to rely on how good Master Dong was, and that's it, then it's worthless because we have to be able to embody it here and now in front of our patients on a daily basis. So the lineage system is good in that it transmits information, but the danger is that we rely on that rather than our own ability to embody it, to cultivate it, and to apply it in the clinic.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic software management I use to keep everything running smoothly. So, let's chat about timing for a minute, because when it comes to raising your fees, timing really is everything. A great time to roll out a fee increase is during natural, fresh start periods, like the beginning of the year. People are already thinking ahead, setting new goals, and adjusting their routines. So, it's a good time to make a change feel natural. Or you might want to try it in September when everyone's back in school mode and in the mood for a fresh start. For more tips on navigating fee increases, check out frontdesk.jane.app and look for the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. Jane wants to be a part of your journey in raising your fees with features built to help, like sliding scale adjustments and customized reminder emails. You can take a look at their pricing plans at jane.app/pricing. And if you're ready to get started with Jane, don't forget to use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Again, I'm going to sound like a grumpy old man. I look at things like search on the computer, which is a fabulous tool.
Yeah.
I use it all the time. I'm grateful for it. We have AI coming along, which is even a whole different universe of interacting with knowledge. How we'll use that, I don't know. That said, there's something about working the material.
Yep.
Not having it at your fingertips. Having, like in a book you've got to look up.
Right.
Until it's finally in your fingertips. Doing the arpeggios, doing the memorization, seeing the connections between different points. Oh, I looked at that point chart enough where I realized, like pericardium 6, triple burner 5, they're inside, outside. It's in the name. It's in the location. Oh, there's a lot of other points. They rhyme with each other in similar ways. Now the system begins to enliven a bit. And then I think it has the capacity to actually teach you about it.
Right.
And some of the fabulous tools that we have, and I love them, I'm afraid sometimes they get in the way.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. Yeah.
Right. And again, I don't want to sound like an old crabby guy like, you got to learn it like we did in the old days, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, and man, as a younger man, I hated the word discipline. I hated it, right? Mostly because I needed more of it.
Yeah.
I really did. And it wasn't until later that I got that figured out. But the discipline seems, I'm going to call it an aspect of cultivation that I don't think gets talked about very often.
Right. Yeah, and I think going back to one of your early questions is what does cultivation mean, and what does cultivation mean today in modern times? Because listen, I came in through Chinese medicine precisely because I had a martial arts practice. That was one of my two early loves. There's music and martial arts, and so that was something that really brought me into Chinese medicine. First, both as a patient initially, and then thinking that it could be something that I could do myself. And, everyone in TCM school today, because I taught these classes at Pacific College for a number of years in New York City, we get our Qigong Taiji class where in 28 hours we know everything there is to know about Qigong and Taiji, assuming that would actually develop some sort of practice maybe in a patient, in a student, which sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. I think that one of the misnomers is the idea that everyone needs to do Qigong or everyone needs to do Taiji. And even though I'm a big fan, because it's something that it's my personal thing that I do, when we're talking about cultivation, for me, a lot of it is how can I find some space in the context of my regular activities, my daily life, to be able to find that place of inward focus, of inward attention, so that I can sort of at least temporarily drown out the noise or escape the noise, not necessarily even drown out, that I think is becoming even more characteristic of contemporary life, right? And I do believe it's becoming harder and harder to do this. So whether it's the practice of music, whether it's writing poetry, whether it is practicing with some sort of somatic body-mind discipline, right? Those are ways in which we can sort of tune out everything else to recharge ourselves in a way that it's hard to do otherwise, right? One of the benefits of the pandemic for me was that it gave me a space in which I could really dedicate myself back into my body-mind movement practices. And so I've practiced some sort of martial art or Qigong at this point for over 40 years, since I was 10 years old. But it wasn't until the pandemic that I could say that I've practiced without missing a single day. And so now it's been, 5+ years since then. And it reminded me of, with all the chaos happening outside, it reminded me again of the importance of doing that sort of one thing, whatever it is for the person doing it, where they can turn inwards, recharge. It helps them sort of re-energize themselves so that when they go back into the clinic, they have something that they can give, right? So cultivation doesn't have to be just one thing, but it has to be, I think, should be something for people. And I do think it's getting harder with Facebook, with all the social media, with, the state of the world today. Everything is sort of scattering.
Yes, very much scattering.
Right? So we need a little daily aconite to bring things back to the Ming Men, right? Because that's what we're missing, right? Right. If you take herbs that just scatter the qi all day long, it's not good, right? You have to be able to eventually consolidate back to the center. And to me, that's what cultivation is.
And it consolidates the attention.
It does. Absolutely. Right? And because that's what's being scattered, right? It's constantly going out, 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 out. We need to be able to go back in somehow.
Right. In some ways, this is where the study, I find, is so helpful.
And study in and of itself is a cultivation. You don't have to do Qigong to be a great practitioner of Chinese medicine. It's one avenue, but it's certainly not the only.
That thing that you mentioned, though, about it takes you in and it quiets things down. Things reorganize in an interesting way when that happens.
Yes.
I'm thinking, I'm always studying something new, and sometimes I run into parts that are difficult. And I used to get very fussy about them. It's like, oh, this shit's really hard. I get crabby. And at some point, it shifted for me. Like, oh, this part's hard, and it's probably really essential. What if instead of telling myself it's hard, I say it's interesting? Oh, this is the really interesting part. It's not easy either, but it's like really interesting. And like reframe it. This might take me a while, but I'm interested, right?
Right. So you have to talk about this discussion happens oftentimes I've seen this discussion in Tibetan medicine contexts, and I think it probably stems from Tibetan Buddhism, where you have to have a motivation. Like, what's the motivation? And if you can tap into a person's motivation, whether it's your own or your patient's, then that gives you I don't want to say fortitude because that sounds too strong. It gives you the interest to push past those sometimes difficult places. No learning happens in a smooth, linear fashion. I've always enjoyed foreign languages, and I've decided a while ago that every decade that goes by, I'm going to try a new language until I die.
I like it.
As a type, yeah, why not, right? Because as a hobby, but also as a way of sort of cultivating something new, keeping my brain fresh. So this decade, I've decided that I'm going to do Italian because it'll be the first ancestral language that I studied. Ethnically, where the people I grew up around, ethnically, I'm more Italian than anything else. So I've spent time studying other European languages, Asian languages. I've never studied an ancestral language of mine. So I think, okay, that's a good motivation. And I figure I speak Spanish as well. So I figure, this will be easy. Romance languages are easy, right? Compared to Asian languages. Any of you who've studied Asian languages know that they're much more different to English.
They're very different.
Than European, right, than European languages. So, I'm studying, and every once in a while I'll get something I'm thinking, well, this is just really hard, right? This, either the pronunciation or the verb conjugation is just different than what I would have anticipated with a background in Spanish. But it's interesting enough to me that I persist, right? And so what I do is I go back and I listen to the audio that I'm listening to. I do it over and over again. And rather than progressing, I'll keep repeating it. Then I'll progress a little. Then I'll go back and repeat it, because that's what it takes, right? And
that is what it takes.
It's what it takes. And my motivation is such that I'm going to do it, right? In 10 years from now, I'm going to be speaking Italian as well, hopefully better than I speak Asian languages, because it's another European language. And I know I'm going to do it. In the middle of it, I oftentimes feel frustrated and I'm thinking, why am I doing this to myself? But then my motivation takes over, right? So, it's the same thing when you're in the clinic with patients. If your motivation is really, I find some of my friends laugh at me. I don't really read fiction. I don't really like reading fiction. I read Chinese medicine books. That's the main thing I read over and over again. And far from being dull, I find it really, really interesting. And that's my motivation. That's what gets me up. And when I really can't figure out a case, it's the interest in the material, the motivation to get my patients better that makes me go back and read more, study more, and continue trying to engage with the material, right? So the motivation becomes, the motivation becomes important for the discipline. If you don't have the motivation, then the discipline is kind of empty because eventually you're not going to really, you'll either not continue it unless you're really super, super stubborn, which some people are, or, you're never really going to embody the material as much, I think. So it's that motivation becomes an important piece of it.
I hadn't thought about it that way before, but it makes sense. The motivation, the interest. It's like there's something here and I'm not letting the damn thing go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, every professional athlete, again, unless they're a prodigy, which we've already established by definition, most people are not prodigies, right? There's something that grabs onto them like a dog with a bone, that proverbial dog with the bone, that they're not letting it go.
Not letting it go.
Right?
And the harder it gets, the more you grind.
That's right. It's right, absolutely. And the more almost you want to do it, right? Because it's like it drives you crazy.
You know what?
That you haven't done it yet.
Yes. There 100%. There is a part of me. I'm generally a nice, get along kind of guy, but there's a part of me that's really aggressive.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I've got to a place and I'm not getting it, or I need to double down on it or something, it's like I work better with a chip on my shoulder.
Right.
Like this thing is not going to beat me.
Yeah. Listen, it was that for me, when I was young in college, my East Asian Studies degree was in Japanese history. So I studied Japanese as an undergraduate. I lived in Japan for a while as a grad student. I didn't have a background in Chinese language, and it was only actually a couple decades later that I had started studying Taiji with my current Shifu, and his English is okay, but he's really a Chinese speaker. Mm-hmm. And at some point I realized, and then I think for me it was also to some extent hitting a wall with Chinese medicine, in that I knew there was so much more I could have access to if I had some language facility, right?
Yep.
And so at that point I decided, you know what? I'm getting too old. Someday I'm going to die. I don't want to die saying I never spoke Chinese, practicing Chinese medicine, right? And I knew that I would understand my Shifu a lot better when I could speak to him in his own language.
For sure.
Yeah, and so at some point I went to him, and my Chinese was like, I might have only been like 6 months into, I don't know, it was really early in my study of Chinese, and I said, okay, from now on, we're only speaking in Chinese. If there's something I really don't understand, then we can try to figure it out in English. But we're only doing Chinese now. And that's what did it. It was that motivation and that stubbornness that, I'm going to do it at this point. That's it. I'm starting. I'm going to do it. And I think that's a useful, it may be uncomfortable for our spouses to have to deal with, but it's a useful trait for our clinical practices.
Everybody around us except our patients.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about that chip on the shoulder thing.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it, but I'd lean on it all the dang time. Like, this thing is not going to beat me.
Well, I mean, nothing. I mean, we should know. We practice Chinese medicine. Nothing is black and white, right? So, there's an approach to Japanese psychology called Morita therapy that I've studied with a wonderful group called the Toto Institute. And we could even that's something we should talk about sometime. I think it's fascinating. And one of my dreams is to bring more of it to Chinese medicine practitioners. But Morita was a psychiatrist, and he basically treated patients with back then was called shinjing shuairou, right? Weakness of the nerves, which is neurasthenia. Right, in Japanese, shinkei-shitsu. So, which is basically like anxiety, unipolar disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder. And Morita used to say that anxiety is nothing more than misplaced attention.
Oh.
Right.
That sounds right.
Okay. Because, yeah, absolutely. I was a public school teacher. I can tell you that the kids who had test-taking anxiety were anxious because they cared how they did on the test, right? The kids who did not care if they passed high school were not anxious when taking tests because they didn't care. So the anxiety was nothing more than the flip side of the desire to do well, right? So that chip on the shoulder gets you through certain situations. Whether we see that as something good or something bad is just our own interpretation of the meaning of that character trait.
Yes. Well, and
right?
At certain moments,
and the context,
it's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's really helpful. And at other moments, it's an obstruction.
That's right.
Which is why Chinese medicine is so fabulous, because like dongui, is that a good herb? Well,
exactly.
For who?
Right.
And when?
Right. Listen, my students, I tell them all the time, I say, okay, what's the best acupuncture point for clearing heat? Right? And everyone says, oh, it's large intestine 11, or it says, I'm like, okay. But in the end, it's like, what's the context? If someone has gout, maybe large intestine 11 is not the point to clear the heat from someone's big toe. That's the best thing to do, right? So it all depends on the specific context and the application. And that flexibility is obviously really important, right? Yeah, that was a meandering conversation that came to that point, but it's not a bad point anyway.
I think it's an essential point because, at least in my understanding, this is what Chinese medicine is.
Absolutely.
It's a system. It's a set of maps and tools that allows us to interact with an ongoing changing system.
Yes.
While being partly in it and partly not in it.
Absolutely.
It's an extraordinary way to develop all kinds of perception that you otherwise wouldn't get.
That's right. And it's and that ability is predicated on, as we were talking about before, by the mastery of all of those most basic pieces of information, right? So I think a lot of us, if we grew up watching martial arts movies and, the secret Shaolin manual kind of thing, right? We're always looking for that, what's the secret technique type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is the secret technique is nothing more than a greater mastery of the basics. And by doing that, it allows us the brilliant flexibility to deal with changing landscape in the clinic when we're with patients, right? This is, I wrote a blog piece on this a long time ago, the fallacy of the idea or the fantasy of the idea of the secret method or the secret technique, because really the only secret is the basic material, right? Everything we taught our students in the first semester TCM theory class was the most important stuff they ever really learned. It's just, we like the advanced things, so we forget about the basic stuff. Somehow we look for the advanced, and we lose sight that the basic is what allows the advance to happen, right? It's even the kind of like idea of intuition. I wrote another blog piece on intuition, and I think I upset a lot of people, where I said that for me, in my clinical practice, my hope is that my intuition plays as little a part as possible in what I do, right? Because there's a method, and if I work the method, it should work better than what my intuition tells me. And I think that intuition is, you're so pickled in the material that you come to the answer without remembering how you got there. But it's only because you're so pickled in all the information that you can't even escape that basic understanding.
On a good day, when the intuition also happens to be right. I know from my own experience, because it's rough being a human sitting with other people that are suffering, and it's your job to try to help.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, okay, no pressure. Like, of course there's pressure.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to help. So for a long time, I've had the question of, I have this brilliant idea. Is that my intuition? Is it my wishful thinking? Is it just my hope that they're going to get better? Because, man, I'm having a rough day and I need my patients to get better for me to feel good.
Right.
I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that goes into, I work intuitively. It's like,
right. Yeah.
I always get nervous when I hear that.
Yeah, me too.
Because when I'm thinking that to myself, I know I'm off the rails.
Right. So like when I have like an intuitive sense, and for those of you who can't see the video, I'm doing the air quotes, an intuitive sense in the clinic, I have to check myself and say, is that because it is wishful thinking, or is it because I'm just remembering another experience with a different patient? Is it the rapid processing of information that I have under my fingertips already? And it's important for us to be able to check that. If you're working solely on intuition without having the basic material, and again, maybe there are prodigies out there that can do this, but they are not you or me. Or, I tell people all the time, I'm not an enlightened being. Well, I guess if we're Buddhists, we're all enlightened beings. We just forgot it. But you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not someone's guru. I'm not that smart. I'm not that good. All I have is the method, and I have my constant study of the method. And that's what I try to rely on. And that's why I've had a busy practice for the last 2+ decades. It's but it comes from, again, that mastery of the basic material. It comes from me having played those scales and arpeggios, which is why I'm not a professional musician to this day. Right now, I was, but since I don't do those scales and arpeggios every day anymore,
then you can't do it, right?
I can't do it. I mean, I can play better than obviously the average person, clearly, but the reason I can do what I do in the clinic is because I'm in the clinic a minimum of like 50 hours a week, every week.
Doing your arpeggios.
Doing my arpeggios every day. Every day I'm finding that point, I'm putting a needle in, and I'm looking at the response, and we're doing it over and over and over and over. And I mean, so let's have a moment of honesty, right? So if you haven't passed your NCCAOM exams yet, just don't listen for a second. How many acupuncture points do you use like on a daily basis? How many different points do you use on a daily basis?
Different points.
Yeah. Like if you're going to do a retrospective analysis of your charts.
Yeah.
And you make a spreadsheet of how many different points you did, out of the 300 some odd points we force people, or in Dong's acupuncture, even more points we force people to learn. How many points do you do? At
the most 30 to 35.
Yeah. That's probably about the same for me, right? Over and over. And then once in a while, you'll have that other point that you don't, so like, there's a point in Dong's acupuncture on the back of the thumb. We bleed for non-healing wounds and ulcerations. I don't do it every day, but when it's needed, it works. It works really well. Like surprisingly to me, even though I've done it for a long time. But the truth is, the majority of points we do tend to be heavy hitters, and they're heavy hitters for a reason, because they do a lot of things really, really well consistently. Same thing in TCM acupuncture. Same thing in Dong's acupuncture. So from the outside, it might look a little boring if we're doing the same points over and over and over again, but I find it really fascinating still.
Well, it's fascinating because, look, on one hand, you can say, look, I'm doing the same point, but actually, no, you're not. You're doing it for this patient.
Right.
For this reason.
Right. Based on what you feel in their body, all of it. Absolutely. All of it.
All of it. So in one sense, yes, it's LI11. It's LI11. But is it LI11 clearing heat? Is it LI11 as a quartet that I'm using in Sa'am acupuncture?
Right.
Is it for a cause?
And right. And is it LI11 because of its location on the channel? Is it, for example, in Sa'am acupuncture because it's the soil earth point on the yang metal channel?
Right.
That means it does something specific in the context of that patient. And so the understanding of why so a beginner may do it because they've seen it done, and it acupuncture is forgiving in that way, that you can oftentimes get some effect even if you don't have complete understanding. But then over time, as your understanding deepens, based on the core material that you're manipulating over and over and over again, right? Then your understanding of it unfolds in a way, even if you're doing the same point over and over and over again, you're understanding why it's useful in that case for that specific patient. And then you can translate that to future cases that may be novel to you based on your understanding of the basics. That's really what I find absolutely fascinating. Yeah.
Imagine this. A patient walks into your clinic. They're carrying more than the pain in their body. There's a story there. A history woven with the stress of long days, the ache of things unsaid, and the quiet longing for something to shift. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your hands, your intuition, your heart. It's not just about needles or a formula. It's about connection, understanding the threads that tie us together, mind, body, and spirit. That is where golden flower Chinese herbs comes in. Rooted in tradition and crafted with care, their formulas are more than herbs. They're a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern practice. Every bottle, a quiet partner in your work, helping you to meet your patients where they are. Because healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about creating trust, cultivating belonging, and helping someone feel truly seen. Golden Flower Chinese Herbs, your partner in practice and connection, where tradition meets care. I think you've just described something that I've only recently been describing to myself, which is, as you learn a system, if you stick with it and you're loyal to learning it, right? And that takes some time and attention.
Yes.
Stick with it long enough, the system will begin to teach you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't remember because it's been so long that we did our initial discussion. But, one of the things that I did when I first started learning Dong's acupuncture over 20 years ago now, I mean, it's been a long time. I made the commitment to myself to only use Dong's points and strategies or whatever for a minimum of 2 years in the clinic, which I did before I allowed myself to, let's start mixing and matching. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep.
And so I recommend this to my students all the time. If you really want to learn, Som acupuncture and be that, you should do it. Right. Because then not only are you working the system, but as you said, the system is working you. Absolutely. Absolutely.
The system is working you. It will teach you 100%. My first year with Som acupuncture, I had that commitment. Unless I couldn't see the diagnosis through the Som parameters. In that case, it was like, because you can go wrong with that system pretty easily, and that'll cause problems. But if I could see the diagnosis, I would use it, and I would just use one side, not two sides, nothing fancy, nothing extra, one input. It's like when you're learning herbs, it's like I'm going to use all the classic formulas, unmodified in the classical way.
Which is a type of cultivation in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Whether you do Qigong or Tai Chi or whatever, that is a type of cultivation that I think is really, really essential in the clinic also.
I think so too. And look, I like knocking around in the weeds, and I like seeing connections where maybe they're not so obvious. This might be one of the reasons why I love acupuncture so much. Acupuncture doesn't let me do that. If I really want to learn something, I have to bring that discipline in. And do exactly what you're talking about. You give it a period of time. I think 2 years is a reasonable
I think so.
time frame.
So. Yeah.
If you don't have it by then, well, maybe it's not for you.
Right. And listen, things can go wrong if you decide to abandon it. That's fine. Or we all have that patient where you do one needle differently. They're like, wait, what? Why are you doing that? Why are you putting a needle there today instead of where we always put it, right? And that's fine. So you don't freak your patients out. If they're used to having a certain thing, that's fine. But if you're learning something with your patients, whatever new patient you have coming in, you try as best you can to make the system work. And if you can't figure it out, you go back to the books and you
go back to the book, back to the class. These days, there's groups online that you can talk to. Absolutely. It's really fantastic. Soon you'll be able to ask AI for help, I think. But that's a different story. But yes, that discipline of this is what I'm going to do until I have it. And then I think at that point, then it is possible to see how this might connect to other things.
Absolutely. And I think...
But if you do that too soon, it muddies the water.
Right.
And the system will not teach you. The system is a harsh mistress.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. And I think that is precisely, really, I think that sort of hits it on, that's the nail on the head, right? If you really understand your system and you can work it, then you can go out and explore other material and eventually bring it in and incorporate it into the material you started with. Right? Every system we have today came from someone's experience, someone's thought. And this is where I also think to some extent that orthodoxy is a fantasy, right? In that if you were to go find different Som acupuncturists, they might have different expressions of Som based on their clinical experience, based on whatever else they studied, right? So, I practice a lineage of Taiji Chuan that's a offshoot of the Chen style called the Hunyuan system. and the person who founded the system, Grandmaster Feng Zhichang, he studied, I think he studied Tongbei in his youth, a northern Chinese system, and he studied Xingyi with someone else for a while. And then his main system is Taiji, right? But the Taiji, you can't divorce what he did in his Taiji from the other things that he already had in his body, right? So it's still Taiji, but the expression of it is not exactly the same because of that previous experience.
Yes.
So if you start with TCM and you eventually learn Dong's acupuncture or Sam acupuncture, it's not that your experience beforehand is worthless. You bring that experience to the table with you, and it may change. So for example, I initially trained at New England School in Japanese acupuncture, which is why the Sam stuff is absolutely fascinating, and I resonate a lot with those concepts. Because in the Japanese meridian therapy, like Shudo Denmei style, I was trained in Toyohari initially as well. It's all choosing Jinging Shujing He points based on 5-phase models, doing needling based on certain Nanjing style supplementing draining needling rules, right?
Very
similar, because a lot of Japanese acupuncturists in the 20th century were influenced by Korean acupuncture practitioners, very much so. Very, very similar concepts. So my own practice of Dong's acupuncture is very, very heavily based and informed by that. My palpation of points is not at all the Dong acupuncture. If you were to go to Taiwan today, it's much more like what you would see in Japanese acupuncture practices, right? And that's because that's what was in my hand ahead of time before I learned Dong's acupuncture. So even though I'm primarily Dong-style acupuncturist, it is very much informed by these other systems that were under my fingers first. And that's okay, right?
It's how we become who we are as practitioners.
Right.
Sometimes people will ask me, what kind of acupuncture do I practice? Patients will ask that. Sometimes because really what they want to say is, can you help me? But they don't know how to ask that question. So they just say, what kind of acupuncture do you practice? Because they've heard about different kinds. Or, there's a lot of reasons why people ask, what kind of acupuncturist are you? Mostly they want to know is, are you competent?
Right.
But the kind of acupuncturist that we become, it always is this mismatch.
It is.
Because that's how the soup gets cooked.
And that's okay. That's the important thing to note is that's okay as well,
It's not just okay. That's how it works.
It is. One of my Qigong students who's very, very capable and very, very bright. One of the things he wants to do is start translating early Qigong texts from the 1960s and reconstruct them, the practices they describe. Because we don't have videos of these guys doing this stuff, right? We just have their written description. And it's pretty hard to reconstruct a physical movement practice from written description. So he explains it. He's almost like in Jurassic Park, where you have the DNA of this creature and you're trying to recreate this thing that's no longer extant, right? And I find that idea really kind of interesting and amusing. So, but for me, what is interesting to me is the living tradition that changes from time to. So the martial arts, the Taiji that I practice, is not the same that my Shifu practices. I mean, it's the same, but it's not the same. It's the form is the same, and it sort of looks the same.
Yeah, but it's digested through you and everything that you've brought to it.
Through me. Right. And my decade plus of other martial arts experience, more than that, probably actually
and your acupuncture
all of it
practice
that I had going into it. So Master Dong's acupuncture is gone. When he died, it died. Not the Dong system, but his expression of the Dong system, right? And that's okay. His students had their own expression. Many of them went in for many of his students were famous TCM doctors in their own right before they studied with him. So that, of course, influenced their application of the system. My experience in Japanese acupuncture and TCM herbal training informed my practice of Dong's acupuncture. And that's all okay. But going back to what the things we were talking about earlier, it's when you have that system really under your belt, then you are much more capable of integrating other material into it, right?
You were also talking about this earlier in discussing
Absolutely.
Intuition, that You can have your intuition, but then you check it against the methodology.
Right.
Because the methodology is a kind of reality. It's a kind of, it's a structure that will support you in your thinking and in your perception.
Absolutely. Like, right. Look, when I find that I, because all of us, doesn't matter how many years in practice you are, at some point you'll have the patient come in front of you and you feel like, I don't know anything, right?
It's a great place to start.
It's a really good place to start.
It's a terrible place to end.
Exactly. That's totally true. Right.
You don't want to end there, but I think you absolutely want to start there. And especially, I find this especially with patients that I've had some success with. I want to do my utmost when they come in again to not really know who they are.
Right.
When I first see them, because previous successes will often blind me to what's now currently arising.
Right, exactly. And so when you feel that way, or when I feel that way, I think to myself, okay, I'm going to try to not pay attention to what I think I know about them. Right?
What I think I know. That's a great way to say it.
And go back and feel their pulse, palpate points, ask them very specifically, what do you mean when you say, I can't sleep? Or what do you mean when you say, I'm constipated? Right? I have people come in and say, I'm constipated, and they're moving their bowels 3 times a day. I'm like, okay, we need to be specific about what we're talking about. And going back then and really filtering that through the lens of the core material once again. Years ago, I had this patient come to me, and she came in, and she had been a patient of mine for a while for acupuncture, but she came in with complaining of a recent diagnosis of hypertension, right? And I was probably just asleep at the wheel that day, and I put her on like a Tien Ma Gotangin or something like that, and had her on it for 2 or 3 weeks, and nothing budged. And one day she walked in again, and I simply paid attention, right? Where she was cold all the time, she was slightly edematous, sort of puffy, pale looking. The pulse was deep, and there was just the pulse was gone. And so I put her on I think it was a sunitang of some sort, right? Mm-hmm. With a hefty dose of aconite. And her blood pressure normalized not within weeks, but within days. Because I paid attention rather than thinking, okay, everyone uses this formula for hypertension, everyone does that, right? You pay attention again. And that's the purpose also of cultivation, of bringing yourself back to that place of inner quiet, so you have the capacity to pay attention again. And if you do that, it just works better, especially if you can do that. And I don't have the hundreds of patients a week kind of practice, but a typical week I can see between 60 and 80 patients in basically 3 long days. So I basically work 4 days, more or less, 3 long days and 1 shorter day. If I'm not paying attention, then it's easy for people to get sort of washed in the, you can let a lot of things go and not be able to treat them appropriately and effectively. So that ability to really bring yourself back and pay attention to what's in front of you becomes really something of the utmost importance.
A reset with every patient.
Has to be.
Man, if I could just take my mind like an old-fashioned Etch-a-Sketch between each patient, turn it upside down, give it a shake.
Seriously.
Be helpful.
Seriously. Absolutely. But that's where the method helps, right?
Yes.
That's where having played those scales and arpeggios over and over again helps, because that's what you can rely on, right?
Back to basics. Right.
That's what you can rely on.
Back to basics. I find for myself, when in my mind I'm thinking, well, according to the theory, blah, 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 I know I've completely lost the scent of the trail. Whenever I start thinking according to the theory, I'm lost. And I'll do a reset. And the reset is, am I looking at a case of excess or deficiency? Right. I just go back to that. Is this excess or deficiency? And just start again.
It's that, without a doubt. And then also paying attention to what the patient's body is telling us, right? Mm-hmm. And not only in a theoretical way, but and this I think this comes in my practice from my experience with Japanese acupuncture, where palpation is so important, right? When I was a supervisor, I supervised for the Pacific College. I mean, I was on faculty at Pacific College in New York for 16, 17 years, something like that. And I only did clinical supervision for a few years, but students would come to say, okay, here's the patient, present the case, this is what I think is happening, these are the points I want to do. And I would always say, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take the points you want to do, and you're going to think what other points are possible, and you're going to go palpate.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
So I want to do moxa on the person's abdomen at Ren 6. Well, palpate Ren 6, Ren 4, Ren 3. See which one feels more cold and more flaccid, right? Or I'm gonna do the small intestine 3, gallbladder 62 for back pain. Okay, fine. Palpate 62, 63, 64, 65 on the bladder channel. See which one we actually have more reactivity. So the theory only gets us so far, right?
Yes.
This in Chinese philosophy, this is Ti and Yong, right? This is like theory and application, right? So what's the absolute concept, and then what's the actual practical application? Because eventually we have to not only go back to basics, but we have to go back to basics in the context of that patient. So we can tell what's excess and deficiency through basic signs and symptoms. But then when we decide what point am I using for deficiency, then it might be a matter of what point am I palpating? Depending on the system, right? If you're looking at something that's very prescriptive, then that's okay, as long as it works. Does the pulse change? Does the patient feel better afterwards, right? So for me, even if I'm doing Dong's acupuncture, one of the techniques we use in a lot of Japanese systems is we do pulse palpation with very light touch of points to see which point changes the pulse, right?
Yeah.
Very handy. And you know what?
Instant
it works
feedback.
if it's Dong's acupuncture, it works if it's TCM acupuncture, it works if it's, I don't know Sam because I don't practice it, but I can tell you since I practice these other ones, it works with these other systems. So you feel the pulse, you touch the patient, and you see what actually makes the patient better, at least in the short term. Then you apply the needles, right? So it's going back to basic theory, going back to what is the patient's body actually telling me, especially for acupuncture, right? It's much harder practicing herbs because you don't know until they drink it. That's the problem, right? Acupuncture is awesome. No, you can figure it out even whether it's by Ashur location, whether it's gentle touch. You can almost determine ahead of time before you put the needles in. You can predict which points will work better based on patient response.
Yes, and after you do it for a while, you expect to look for that. You know what your markers are.
Absolutely.
Different people have different markers. Different systems have different markers.
Yes.
The thing I love about acupuncture, this is a generalization, but it's worked for me. Whatever markers are reliable for you, whatever system you want to go and learn, keep your markers.
Absolutely.
Because that's something that you already know is reliable in terms of getting information from the body. And as you're practicing a new system, like go check your markers.
Right, absolutely.
I found that to be really helpful.
And that's when working the system, you can rely on that, and that's when the system eventually continues to expand and unfold itself in front of the person, which is a really, really, it's kind of a neat thing, I have to say. Whoever made this stuff up was really smart, far smarter than I am, Or not. I'm going to rephrase that. It's not whoever made it up. Whoever paid attention enough to realize what was going on and figure out how to teach it to the next person and taught them to pay attention to what was going on. That's where the magic is. Yeah.
That is where the magic is. Yeah. And some discipline, some arpeggios in a dark room with your eyes closed.
That's right. That's what it comes down to, for me at least. That's why I tell people studying music was, you have to study the biology and you have to study whatever, but that as my foundational sort of method of education was incredibly useful for practicing Chinese medicine, incredibly useful. I was very thankful for it. Even though I'm not a professional musician, not a second of that training was a waste. Not a second.
I don't think we really throw anything useful away. Anything
No, I agree.
helpful that we've learned. I've had 3 different careers. And as I look back and connect dots, there's aspects of all of those that come into my clinic today. I don't think we throw away any of the kind of experience that you were just talking about, where you're paying attention and you're working something out. I think that seasons us in a way. I think it does something to our perception that regardless of what we're running through our perception, there's a kind of refinement.
Absolutely.
That's my sense
That's
of it.
That's why your acupuncture is your acupuncture, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's your style? It's Michael's style.
It's a mishmash of things
right.
that I've learned over the years and continue to learn because I got to tell you, Henry, I got curious about this stuff as a patient. I mean, there just came a point where I've been using acupuncture, and the very innocent question pops into my mind: how the hell does this stuff work? And it wouldn't go away.
Right.
Here I am, 26 years in practice later. I still have the same question.
Right. It's
as interesting to me today as it was back then. It just doesn't stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't remember if we talked about this when I was here before. My first experience that made me realize I had to learn it. Not that I wanted to learn it, but I had to learn it.
You had to. What happened?
So, as a martial artist, I practiced a lot. I must have been my first year after my freshman year at Oberlin. You keep in mind, it's like we sound like we're talking about the dark ages when we mention these things, but it's like there was no internet to speak of yet, right? No one had email. There were no cell phones. You still had to pay for long distance calls. And I got this flyer in the mail that summer. It said, come out to this little town in Pennsylvania, not too far from Reading, and learn all the secrets of the martial arts masters, right? And it was a seminar on pressure point striking, acupuncture point striking, basically, right? And it was like $30, I don't remember because it was a long time ago. And so I called a friend of mine and I said, listen, we're going to go out, we're going to drive to Pennsylvania to take this class, right? And we went through the class and it was interesting. We talked about like striking, basically acupuncture points. And they even would name them at, they say, okay, we're going to strike stomach 6 or we're going to strike stomach 5 or something like that, right? And at the end of the class, the teacher asked for a volunteer, and because they were going to demonstrate an application of a light touch knockout. Okay. And so he asked for volunteers. My friend threw up his hand as fast as he could and he said, Henry wants to volunteer. And so, all right, fine, let's do it. And so I'm standing there and he's talking about what he's about to do. And I noticed there's like 3 or 4 big guys like moving to stand behind me. I didn't know if they were there to catch me. Right. And so, he said something, looked at me, and then pop, as a light, like, it's like, as hard as you would like clap your hands. And he struck, I'm not going to tell you the points because I don't want people to go out and start like smacking each other without proper instruction. But it was what in boxing you call technical knockout, because I wasn't unconscious, but I could not stand up. Right?
Wow.
And everything that I had heard about, there's something in the body that there are these things called channels, there's these, this thing called chi, whatever, however you want to define it, and it's a big, big, big thing. But I knew that and it wasn't, I knew from theory, I knew from practical experience.
Yes.
At that moment, it was like in Zen, they talk about satori, instant enlightenment, right? Sudden realization. I had a sudden realization there was something very deep, something very profound, and something that I absolutely had to figure out, how to study, right? I didn't even have a choice. That was it. It was literally beaten into me. And that was the beginning. Yeah,
wonderful.
That was the beginning.
There are pivotal moments. You don't make a decision to do something. The decision was done. You just know you're on a new path.
I was primed for interest in the material, but at that moment, it's like that's what I knew I needed to really figure out. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, my friend, this has been enjoyable.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate the time, and as a young man, I had trouble with discipline. As an older man, I'm learning to appreciate it. I hope I get a few more years because I think it really helps my practice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Till next time.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
That's it for our conversation today with Henry. Perhaps because I'm a slow learner, I'm not so good at taking an idea and being able to see several moves ahead like a chess master. It takes me time and multiple iterations to be able to grasp an idea in a reliable way. So I draw comfort in hearing that it's not brilliance that builds a great practitioner. It's discipline, curiosity, and a refusal to quit when things either get difficult or boring. Henry's reflections on learning through music and how that shaped his relationship with Chinese medicine, it speaks to the power of repetition and structure. His thoughts on sticking with a system until it starts teaching you, that has been my experience as well. I don't think students or newer practitioners hear that often enough. So I'm glad that we discussed this, and I want to underscore it. It's not to be discounted. Stay with a method. Really work it from the basics on up, and in time, it will show you more nuanced aspects of how it can be applied. We also touched on the risks of relying too much on lineage. Again, something in my experience, our profession has a tendency to fetishize. I know there have been times in my career when I didn't have the clinical chops and was hoping that leaning on history and lineage might lend me some capacity that I'd not yet developed for myself. I'm not saying that lineage practices are empty, but that just because we are connected to masterful practitioners, it doesn't mean that we get any kind of pass on doing the hard work for ourselves. There's a lot of having to work the scales, polish the fundamentals again and again. Mastery is slow medicine. And finding motivation when it's not exciting, well, that's just part of the practice. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.